I walked into the Rosewood Country Club, wearing my sister's borrowed blazer and the only pair of dress shoes I owned, thinking I was dressed appropriately for a charity auction. I was wrong. The moment I stepped through those mahogany doors, I felt every eye in the room size me up and find me lacking. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over women dripping in diamonds and men whose watches cost more than my annual salary. This wasn't just a fundraiser. This was a social battlefield where your net worth determined your seat at the table. But I had promised Sofia I would be there. My little sister had worked for months organizing this benefit for the Wounded Warriors Foundation, and nothing, not my discomfort, not the intimidating crowd, not even my obviously out-of-place appearance, would keep me from supporting her. I just hadn't expected to feel like such an outsider in a room full of people claiming to support the very cause I'd bled for. The autumn evening air carried the scent of expensive perfume and fresh roses as I made my way through the crowd. Sofia had transformed the country club's grand ballroom into something magical. Soft lighting highlighted elegant auction displays, while servers in crisp uniforms weaved between guests carrying champagne flutes that caught the light like liquid gold. Silent auction tables lined the perimeter, showcasing everything from vacation packages to artwork donated by local artists. But my attention was drawn to the main stage where the live auction items were displayed, particularly the piece that had caught my eye in the catalog. It was a vintage military compass, brass and worn smooth by countless hands. The description mentioned it had belonged to a decorated officer from the Korean War, and something about its weathered face reminded me of my grandfather's stories about navigation under fire. Sofia knew I collected military memorabilia, not for its monetary value, but for the stories each piece carried. This compass wasn't the most expensive item up for auction tonight, but it spoke to me in a way that transcended its estimated value. I approached the registration table, where a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair sat behind an elegant display of auction paddles. Her name tag read Mrs. Whitmore, Auction Coordinator, in gold lettering that matched her jewelry. She looked up from her clipboard with the kind of practiced smile that nonprofit volunteers perfected, warm enough to seem welcoming, but with an undertone that suggested she could spot a potential donor from across the room. "Good evening, dear," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of old money. "Are you here for the auction, or perhaps looking for someone?" The question stung more than it should have. I straightened my shoulders, drawing on years of military bearing even in civilian clothes. "I'm here to register for bidding. I'm Sofia Chen's sister." Mrs. Whitmore's eyebrows rose slightly, and she glanced down at a printed list beside her clipboard. "Sofia's sister, how lovely. Though I should mention, dear, that bidding registration requires a credit verification and minimum pledge commitment. Are you familiar with our auction procedures?" I pulled out my wallet and handed her my driver's license and credit card. "I understand there's a process. I'm prepared to participate." She took my information with obvious reluctance, typing slowly on her tablet while stealing glances at my outfit. The borrowed blazer suddenly felt too tight across my shoulders, and I became acutely aware of the small scuff on my left shoe that I'd tried to polish away earlier. "Well," she said, after what felt like an eternity of typing and verification, "your credit does clear, but I feel obligated to mention that tonight's items tend to reach quite high values. The vacation packages alone typically go for several thousand, and some of the artwork—" She trailed off, her implication clear. "I appreciate the concern," I said, keeping my voice level, "but I'm here for a specific item, and I'm prepared to bid appropriately." Mrs. Whitmore handed me a paddle numbered 127, her smile now strained. "Of course, dear. Just remember that all bids are binding commitments. We've had unfortunate situations in the past where enthusiastic bidders got caught up in the moment and couldn't honor their pledges." I took the paddle and slipped it into my purse beside my phone, which buzzed with a text from Sofia. "Can't wait to see you. Look for the compass in lot 23. Thought you'd love it." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was being treated like a potential deadbeat by someone who probably couldn't pronounce half the places I'd served, while my sister, who knew exactly why certain military artifacts meant so much to me, had specifically flagged the item I'd already decided to bid on. I moved away from the registration table and tried to blend into the crowd. The conversations around me centered on stock portfolios, vacation homes, and charitable tax deductions. I found myself listening to a group of women discussing their previous auction experiences, their voices carrying over the ambient music. Last year's Hamptons retreat went for $12,000, one woman said, adjusting her pearl necklace. Of course, the Weatherbys could afford to bid it up just for the sport of it. I heard the silent auction is quite competitive this year too, another added. Though honestly, some people don't understand auction etiquette. Last month at the hospital benefit, this woman in a pantsuit kept bidding on items clearly outside her range. So embarrassing when she had to withdraw her bid. I sipped my complimentary water. I'd passed on the champagne, knowing I needed to stay sharp for the bidding, and wondered if they were already talking about me. The feeling of being an outsider intensified when I noticed how conversations seemed to pause when I walked by, as if my presence disrupted some unspoken social rhythm. The silent auction tables provided a welcome distraction. I wandered among the displays, admiring the donated items and reading the bid sheets. A weekend at a spa resort had already reached $800. A piece of local artwork was climbing past $1,200. Golf packages, wine collections, restaurant experiences, all carrying price tags that reflected the wealth in the room. But it was at the military memorabilia table that I felt most at home. Besides the compass I'd come for, there were framed photographs from various conflicts, a collection of medals donated by a veteran's estate, and several books signed by military historians. The bidding sheets here showed more modest amounts, and I wondered if the attendees simply didn't understand the historical significance of what they were looking at. Interested in military history? I turned to find a distinguished man in his 60s standing beside me, his eyes focused on the compass display. His gray hair was cut short, but not quite military regulation, and something about his posture suggested he might have served. "Very much so," I replied. "My grandfather was career Army. These pieces tell stories that shouldn't be forgotten." He nodded approvingly. Korean War era, that compass, probably saw some serious navigation challenges. The craftsmanship was back then, built to last through anything. He extended his hand. "Robert Chen, Sofia's father. You're Sofia's dad." I shook his hand, feeling immediately more comfortable. "She talks about you all the time." "I'm Maria," he finished with a smile. "She's mentioned her big sister many times. Thank you for coming tonight. Sofia was worried the military crowd might not show up, but she really wanted to honor the veterans properly. She's done an amazing job with all this," I said, gesturing around the room. "The compass caught my eye immediately." "Mine too," he admitted, "though I suspect it might go higher than I can justify to my wife." He chuckled. "Are you planning to bid on anything?" Before I could answer, Mrs. Whitmore appeared at my elbow with two other women in tow. "Mr. Chen, how wonderful to see you again. I was just introducing your daughter's friend to our auction procedures." Friend, not sister. I noticed the subtle demotion and wondered if it was intentional. Actually, Robert said smoothly, "This is Maria, Sofia's sister, the one who serves overseas." Mrs. Whitmore's expression flickered with something that might have been embarrassment, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, how nice. Though I hope she understands that tonight's live auction items tend to attract serious collectors. The estimates in the catalog are quite conservative." One of the women with her leaned forward conspiratorially. "That compass has been getting a lot of attention. I heard the Pembrokes are interested, and you know how they get when they want something." I felt Robert stiffen beside me, and I realized this wasn't just casual conversation. It was a warning. These women were essentially telling me to stay in my lane, that certain items were reserved for certain people, regardless of what the auction rules officially stated. "Competition makes auctions more exciting," I said evenly. "May the best bid win." Mrs. Whitmore's smile became razor thin. "Indeed, though experience has shown us that sometimes newer participants can get overwhelmed by the pace of live bidding. It moves quite quickly, and once you raise your paddle, well, there's no taking it back. I understand the commitment involved, I assured her, my military training helping me maintain composure despite the condensation dripping from her voice. The women exchanged glances that spoke volumes. One of them, a redhead whose jewelry probably cost more than my car, leaned closer to Mrs. Whitmore. Perhaps we should review the bidding minimums for tonight's items, just to avoid any misunderstandings. The minimums are clearly posted, Robert interjected, his voice carrying a subtle authority that made all three women pause. And they apply equally to all registered bidders. Mrs. Whitmore's laugh was artificially light. Of course, Mr. Chen. We just want everyone to have a positive experience. Nothing worse than buyer's remorse after an enthusiastic evening. They moved away, their conversation shifting to other topics, but the message had been delivered. I was being marked as someone who didn't belong, someone who might embarrass herself and disrupt their refined gathering. The assumption that I couldn't handle the financial commitment of serious bidding was written all over their faces. "Don't let them get to you," Robert said quietly once they were out of earshot. "This crowd can be intimidating, but their money doesn't make them better than anyone else." "I've dealt with worse," I said, which was true but didn't make the situation any less frustrating. "I just want to support Sofia's event and maybe take home something meaningful." "That compass really speaks to you, doesn't it?" "It does. There's something about these old navigation tools. They represent precision under pressure, reliability when everything else fails. My grandfather taught me that a good compass could save your life if you knew how to trust it." Robert's eyes crinkled with understanding. "Sofia mentioned you have quite a collection of military pieces. Family tradition?" "Something like that." I didn't elaborate, partly because civilian explanations of my military service always felt inadequate, and partly because I'd learned that in crowds like this, being too specific about my background sometimes led to uncomfortable questions about politics or foreign policy that I wasn't here to discuss. The lights dimmed slightly, and Sofia's voice came over the sound system. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our annual Wounded Warriors Foundation benefit auction." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before we begin tonight's live bidding, I want to thank each of you for supporting our veterans and their families. I felt a surge of pride watching my sister command the room. She stood at the podium with natural confidence, her dark hair swept back elegantly, wearing a dress that managed to be both professional and striking. The crowd quieted respectfully as she spoke about the Foundation's mission and the impact their donations would have on veterans' lives. "Tonight's auction features some truly special items," Sofia continued, "including pieces with genuine historical significance. Our auctioneer, Mr. Davidson, will guide us through the evening. But remember, every bid you make is an investment in healing and hope for those who've served our country." Applause filled the room as Sofia introduced the auctioneer, a silver-haired man with the smooth voice and practiced charm essential for high-end fundraising events. Mr. Davidson took the stage with the confidence of someone who'd been running auctions longer than most of the attendees had been wealthy. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin with Lot 1, a spectacular week-long cruise package donated by Platinum Seas Cruises with an estimated value of $4,000. Who'll start the bidding at $2,000? I watched the first few lots sell, noting the rhythm of the auction and the way certain bidders commanded attention from the auctioneer. Paddle numbers were called out with familiarity. Mr. Davidson clearly knew his regular customers. The cruise package went for $5,200. A wine collection reached $3,800. Each successful bid was accompanied by polite applause and knowing nods from the crowd. By the time we reached Lot 15, I'd observed the social dynamics at play. Certain bidders received encouraging nods from the auctioneer when they entered the fray. Others were acknowledged with professional politeness, but nothing more. I wondered which category I'd fall into when my time came. "Lot 23, Mr. Davidson announced, and my attention snapped back to the stage. A genuine Korean War-era military compass, brass construction with original leather case. Estimated value $1,200 to $1,500, with all proceeds benefiting veteran rehabilitation programs. The compass appeared on the display screen behind the auctioneer, magnified to show its weathered beauty. Even projected on a screen, it drew me in. This wasn't just an antique, it was a tool that had guided someone through dangerous territory, a piece of precision engineering that had perhaps saved lives. This remarkable piece comes to us from the estate of Colonel James Morrison, who carried it through 2 tours in Korea. The bidding will start at $600. I felt my heart rate increase slightly. $600 was higher than I'd hoped to start, but still within my planned range. I'd done my research and knew that similar compasses had sold privately for anywhere from $800 to $2,000, depending on condition and provenance. This one appeared to be in excellent condition, and the Colonel Morrison provenance added to its value. $600. Do I have $600? Mr. Davidson's experienced eyes swept the room. Thank you, paddle 43. Now $700, looking for $700. I recognized paddle 43, one of the women who'd been talking with Mrs. Whitmore earlier. She held her paddle with casual confidence, as if the $100 increments were pocket change, which, for her, they probably were. $700 from paddle 81, Mr. Davidson continued, another bidder I didn't recognize, but whose posture suggested serious intent. Now $800, looking for $800. Paddle 43 raised again, $800. I felt my palms start to sweat slightly despite my best efforts to stay calm. This was already approaching the high end of what I'd budgeted, and we were still in the early rounds of bidding. $900, looking for $900. Paddle 81 responded immediately. The bidding was moving quickly now, and I realized I needed to enter soon or risk being priced out entirely. At $900, we were within the estimated range, but auctions had a way of exceeding estimates when multiple bidders wanted the same item. $1,000, looking for $1,000. This was it. I raised paddle 127 for the first time that evening, feeling the weight of every eye in the room turned toward me. Mr. Davidson's gaze found me, and he nodded professionally. $1,000 from paddle 127. Now $1,100, looking for $1,100. Paddle 43 raised again almost immediately, and I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Whitmore leaning over to whisper something in her ear. The woman glanced in my direction, and I could practically see the calculation happening behind her eyes. $1,200, looking for $1,200. I raised my paddle again. $1,200 was at the top of my planned budget, but I couldn't let myself be intimidated out of bidding on something that spoke to me so strongly. The compass deserved to go to someone who would appreciate its history, not someone bidding just to prove they could. $1,200 from paddle 127, Mr. Davidson confirmed. Now $1,300, looking for $1,300. The pause stretched longer this time. Paddle 43 hesitated, conferring quietly with Mrs. Whitmore. Paddle 81 seemed to be considering his options. I held my breath, hoping the bidding might stop at $1,200. "13," paddle 81 called out, raising his paddle with renewed determination. My heart sank slightly. $1,300 was beyond what I'd planned to spend, but not beyond what I could afford if I was careful with my budget for the next few months. The question was whether this compass was worth stretching for. $1,400, looking for $1,400. I thought about my grandfather's compass, lost somewhere in the chaos of his final move to assisted living. I thought about the Colonel Morrison who had carried this compass through dangerous terrain, trusting his life to its accuracy. I thought about Sofia's pride in organizing this event and how she'd specifically mentioned this item to me. I raised my paddle. $1,400 from paddle 127, Mr. Davidson announced, and I caught a ripple of surprised murmurs through the crowd. Apparently, my persistence was noteworthy. $1,500, looking for $1,500. Paddle 43 raised again, but this time with less confidence. I could see her beginning to question whether the compass was worth continuing to bid against someone who clearly wasn't going to be easily intimidated. $1,600, looking for $1,600. I raised my paddle again, my mouth dry but my resolve firm. $1,600 was significantly more than I'd planned to spend, but something about this moment felt important beyond the money. This wasn't just about acquiring a military compass. It was about proving to myself and to this room that I belonged here, that my bid was as valid as anyone else's. 1,600 from paddle 127, Mr. Davidson confirmed. Now 1,700, looking for $1,700. The pause was longer now. Paddle 43 shook her head slightly and lowered her paddle to her lap. Paddle 81 looked uncertain, glancing around the room as if seeking guidance or support. Going once at $1,600, Mr. Davidson called out, his gavel poised. Going twice? I held my breath, hardly daring to believe I might actually win. 1,700! The voice came from the back of the room, and heads turned to identify the new bidder. A tall man in an expensive suit had entered late and was holding up paddle 156. He had the confident air of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. My stomach dropped. 1,700 was beyond my stretched budget, and something about this man's entrance suggested he had considerably more resources to draw on than I did. 1,700 from paddle 156, Mr. Davidson acknowledged. Now 1,800, looking for $1,800. The new bidder's timing felt strategic, as if he'd been watching the auction from outside the room and had entered specifically to claim the compass now that other bidders had been eliminated. It was a power move designed to discourage further competition. But I hadn't spent years in military service to be easily discouraged. I raised my paddle one more time, my hand steady despite the financial risk I was taking. 1,800 from paddle 127, Mr. Davidson called out, and the murmurs in the room grew louder. People were beginning to pay serious attention to this bidding war, and I could feel their curiosity about who I was and why I was willing to push the price so high. Mrs. Whitmore had appeared at the edge of my vision, her expression tense. She seemed to be calculating whether she should intervene somehow, though what authority she might have over the auction process wasn't clear. Several other attendees were whispering among themselves, clearly intrigued by the unexpected drama. 1,900, looking for $1,900, Mr. Davidson continued, his voice maintaining professional calm despite the growing tension in the room. Paddle 156 raised again without hesitation. The man's expression suggested that 1,900 was still well within his comfort zone, and I realized I was facing someone who could probably outbid me by several $1,000s if he chose to. 2,000, looking for $2,000. This was the moment of truth. 2,000 was substantially more than I'd ever planned to spend on any single item, but it was still technically within my means if I was willing to adjust other aspects of my budget. The question was whether I was prepared to make that financial commitment for the sake of principle as much as for the compass itself. I looked at the screen showing the compass, its weathered brass surface telling the story of decades of faithful service. I thought about Colonel Morrison carrying it through hostile territory, trusting his navigation to its precision. I thought about my grandfather's stories and my own experiences in places where reliable equipment meant the difference between mission success and disaster. I raised my paddle. The room erupted in surprised chatter. $2,000 for a compass was well above the estimated value, and my persistence in the face of serious competition had clearly exceeded everyone's expectations. I caught sight of Sofia near the stage, her eyes wide with amazement and what looked like pride. 2,000 from paddle 127, Mr. Davidson announced, his voice carrying a note of genuine admiration. A significant investment in both history and our veterans. Now 2,100, looking for $2,100. Paddle 156 hesitated for the first time, his confidence seemingly shaken by my continued participation. He glanced around the room, perhaps wondering if he'd underestimated his competition or if the compass was worth more than he'd initially calculated. Going once at $2,000, Mr. Davidson called out, giving paddle 156 every opportunity to continue. This is a remarkable piece of military history, ladies and gentlemen. Going twice at $2,000? The gavel came down with a decisive crack. Sold to paddle 127 for $2,000. Congratulations on acquiring a genuine piece of military heritage. The applause was different this time, not just polite acknowledgement, but something that sounded like respect. I had just outbid a room full of wealthy collectors for an item I genuinely valued, and the commitment I'd shown had apparently impressed even those who'd initially dismissed me. Mrs. Whitmore appeared at my side almost immediately, her earlier condescension replaced by what looked like grudging respect mixed with concern. "That was quite a bidding war," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I hope you're prepared for the payment processing." "I understand the commitment I just made," I replied, still processing the fact that I'd actually won. "When do I need to complete the transaction?" "Immediately following the auction," she explained. "We'll need to process your payment and arrange for item pickup or delivery." I must say, that was more excitement than we usually see for the military memorabilia. Robert Chen appeared beside us, his face beaming with what looked like parental pride. "Congratulations, Maria! That compass is going to someone who truly appreciates its history." "Thank you. I admit I got a bit more competitive than I planned, but something about that piece." I trailed off, not sure how to explain the connection I felt to an object I'd never seen in person. "Good instincts," he said. "Colonel Morrison was a decorated officer. Sophia researched all the donated items, and his service record was impressive. 2 bronze stars and a Purple Heart. That compass guided him through some dangerous terrain." The information made my victory feel even more meaningful. This wasn't just a random military antique, it was a tool that had served a genuine war hero, and now it would be preserved by someone who understood its significance. As the auction continued with the remaining lots, I found myself relaxing for the first time all evening. The whispered conversations around me had shifted from dismissive to curious, and several people approached to congratulate me on my successful bid. Word seemed to be spreading through the crowd that the woman in the borrowed blazer had just outbid some serious collectors, and the story was gaining momentum with each retelling. But it was during the final lot, a painting donated by a local artist, that everything changed in a way I never could have anticipated. Mr. Davidson was managing the bidding for the artwork when a late arrival entered through the main doors. The woman who walked in moved with purpose, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and her dark suit speaking of government employment. She surveyed the room with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to assessing situations quickly and accurately. She made her way toward the auction registration table, but instead of stopping to get a bidding paddle, she continued past Mrs. Whitmore and approached the stage area where Sophia was standing. I watched as she leaned close to my sister's ear and spoke quietly but urgently. Sophia's expression changed immediately, her eyes widening with what looked like recognition and concern. She glanced around the room, her gaze searching until it found me in the crowd. Something in her expression made my stomach tighten with apprehension. The woman in the dark suit was now speaking with Mr. Davidson, who had paused the bidding to listen to whatever message she was delivering. His professional demeanor shifted subtly, and he nodded several times while stealing glances in my direction. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Davidson announced, his voice carrying a new note of formality, "we're going to take a brief intermission before concluding tonight's auction. Please feel free to visit the bar and continue enjoying the evening." The crowd began to disperse, but I remained frozen in my seat, watching as Sophia and the government woman made their way through the crowd toward me. Whatever was happening, it involved me directly, and the serious expressions on both their faces suggested it wasn't good news. Mrs. Whitmore had noticed the commotion as well and positioned herself nearby, clearly hoping to overhear whatever conversation was about to take place. Several other attendees lingered within listening range, their curiosity piqued by the unexpected interruption and the official-looking woman who'd caused it. "Maria," Sophia said as she reached me, her voice carefully controlled, but with an underlying tension I recognized from our childhood. "This is Agent Rodriguez from the State Department. She needs to speak with you privately." Agent Rodriguez extended her hand, her grip firm and her eyes serious. "Ms. Martinez, I apologize for interrupting your evening, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. State Department agents didn't show up at charity auctions to deliver happy news. and the fact that she'd tracked me down here suggested whatever situation she was referring to was both urgent and classified. "There's a private dining room off the main hall," Sofia suggested, her voice betraying her worry. "That would be perfect," Agent Rodriguez confirmed. "Miss Martinez, if you could come with me." As we moved toward the indicated room, I was acutely aware of the attention we were drawing. Mrs. Whitmore was practically vibrating with curiosity, and several other attendees were making no attempt to hide their interest in the unfolding drama. Whatever privacy we might achieve in the dining room, the fact that a federal agent had arrived to speak with me would be the primary topic of conversation for the rest of the evening. The private dining room was elegant but smaller than the main ballroom, with a polished conference table surrounded by leather chairs and oil paintings on the walls. Agent Rodriguez closed the door behind us and waited for Sofia and me to be seated before taking a chair across from us. "Ms. Martinez," she began, "I'm going to need to verify your identity before we proceed. Can you confirm your full name, date of birth, and social security number?" I provided the requested information, my military training helping me remain calm despite my growing apprehension. Agent Rodriguez checked my details against something on her tablet, then nodded with satisfaction. "Thank you. What I'm about to discuss is classified at the highest levels, and I need both of you to understand that this conversation cannot be repeated outside this room." She looked at Sofia. "Miss Chen, are you prepared to hear classified information that you'll be legally bound to keep confidential?" Sofia glanced at me, confusion and worry clear on her face. "If Maria needs me here, then yes." Agent Rodriguez turned back to me. "Ms. Martinez, 3 hours ago, we received credible intelligence about a potential security threat involving someone using your identity. We've been trying to locate you since then to verify your whereabouts and ensure your safety." "What kind of threat?" I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flow through my system. "Someone has been impersonating you in communications with foreign contacts, specifically referencing classified operations from your military service." "We need to confirm that you haven't been in contact with any unauthorized parties and establish a timeline of your activities for the past 72 hours. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Someone was using my identity and my classified background for unknown purposes, which meant my military service, the part of my life I'd worked so hard to keep separate from civilian interactions like tonight's auction, was now potentially compromised." "I haven't been in contact with anyone regarding my service record," I said carefully. "I've been preparing for tonight's event and handling routine personal business, nothing that would involve classified materials or foreign contacts." Agent Rodriguez made notes on her tablet. "We'll need to conduct a full debrief, but first I need to ask, has anyone here tonight asked you about your military background or shown unusual interest in your service history?" I thought about Mrs. Whitmore's dismissive treatment and the various conversations throughout the evening. Several people made assumptions about my background, but nothing that seemed like intelligence gathering. Mostly, they assumed I didn't belong here because of how I was dressed. Understood. The impersonation appears to be sophisticated, involving details that only someone with access to classified files would know. We're treating this as a serious breach of operational security. Sofia leaned forward, her concern evident. "Is Maria in danger? Should we be worried about tonight's event?" "We don't believe there's immediate physical danger," Agent Rodriguez assured her, "but we do need to take precautions going forward. Miss Martinez, I'm going to need you to come with me for a full debriefing, tonight if possible." The thought of leaving Sofia's auction before it was finished, before I could even pay for and collect the compass I'd just won, felt wrong on multiple levels. But military training had taught me that operational security took priority over personal preferences. "Can I at least complete the transaction for my auction purchase and say goodbye to my sister properly?" I asked. "I don't want to create more disruption than necessary." Agent Rodriguez considered this. "We can arrange for the auction item to be held for you, but I'd prefer if we could leave as quietly as possible. The fewer people who connect your departure with official business, the better." A soft knock on the dining room door interrupted our conversation. Sofia called out, "Come in," and Mr. Davidson appeared, his expression apologetic but determined. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but we have a situation developing in the main ballroom. Several attendees are asking questions about Miss Martinez and speculating about why a federal agent needed to speak with her. Mrs. Whitmore is particularly concerned about the auction payment for the compass." Agent Rodriguez and I exchanged glances. The cover story we'd hoped to maintain was already falling apart, and the longer we delayed, the more attention we were likely to attract. "What kind of questions?" Agent Rodriguez asked. "Speculation about whether Miss Martinez is who she claims to be, whether her bid was legitimate, that sort of thing. Nothing malicious, but definitely curious. A few people are suggesting we should verify her ability to honor the financial commitment before concluding the evening." The irony was almost painful. Here I was, being questioned about my financial credibility by people who had no idea about the classified situation I was actually dealing with. Mrs. Whitmore's concerns about my bidding capacity seemed trivial compared to potential foreign intelligence threats, but the auction still had to be concluded properly. "I can handle the payment right now," I said, reaching for my purse, "whatever payment method they prefer." "Actually," Mr. Davidson said, his tone shifting to something more formal, "I think there might be a simpler solution. Miss Martinez, would you mind if I made an announcement about your purchase? Sometimes acknowledging significant contributors helps reassure other attendees about the legitimacy of the bidding." I looked at Agent Rodriguez, who nodded slightly. A public acknowledgement might actually provide better cover for my eventual departure than continued secrecy. "What kind of announcement?" I asked. "Just recognition of your successful bid and appreciation for your support of the foundation. Nothing elaborate, but it would demonstrate that you're a legitimate participant in tonight's events." Before I could respond, Sofia stood up with sudden determination. "Actually, Mr. Davidson, I think Maria deserves more recognition than that. She's been incredibly supportive of this event, and her bid on the compass shows real commitment to honoring military history." Something in Sofia's tone suggested she had an idea, and I found myself curious despite the circumstances. Agent Rodriguez looked less enthusiastic about additional public attention, but she didn't object outright. "What do you have in mind?" Mr. Davidson asked. "When we conclude the auction," Sofia said, "I'd like to personally thank Maria for her participation and maybe share a bit about why the military memorabilia means so much to her. Give people context for understanding her commitment to tonight's cause." I felt a moment of panic. Sofia knew I'd served in the military, but she didn't know the specifics of my classified assignments or the current security situation. Whatever she was planning to say could potentially complicate the cover story Agent Rodriguez and I needed to maintain. "Sofia," I said carefully, "I appreciate the thought, but maybe we should keep things simple." "Actually," Agent Rodriguez, interjecting, surprising me, "recognition might not be a bad idea. Sometimes hiding in plain sight is more effective than trying to disappear." Mr. Davidson nodded approvingly. "Perfect. We'll conclude the final lot, and then Miss Chen can make her remarks. It should help put everyone at ease about this evening's events." As we prepared to return to the main ballroom, Agent Rodriguez pulled me aside for a quick private word. "Follow Sofia's lead," she said quietly. "Let her say whatever she was planning, but don't elaborate on your service record beyond what's already public knowledge. We'll use the recognition as cover for your departure." I nodded, understanding the strategy. Sometimes the best way to avoid suspicion was to act naturally rather than trying to hide. If Sofia wanted to thank me publicly for supporting her auction, that would provide a perfect explanation for why I'd been in a private meeting with an official-looking woman. We returned to the main ballroom, where the crowd had reassembled for the conclusion of the auction. The final artwork lot was completed quickly, selling for a respectable $2,800 to a woman who'd been bidding confidently all evening. As Mr. Davidson prepared to conclude the formal auction, I noticed Mrs. Whitmore positioning herself near the stage, clearly hoping to hear whatever announcement was coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Davidson said, his voice carrying easily through the room, "before we conclude this evening's auction, our event organizer, Sofia Chen, has some special recognition to share." Sofia took the microphone with the same confidence she'd shown all evening, but now there was an additional warmth in her expression as her eyes found mine in the crowd. "Thank you all for making tonight's benefit such a tremendous success," she began. Your generosity will make a real difference in the lives of veterans and their families. But I want to take a moment to recognize someone whose participation tonight exemplifies exactly why we're here. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, and I tried to maintain the same composed expression I'd worn all evening, despite my awareness of Agent Rodriguez watching from the edge of the crowd. "My sister, Maria," Sofia continued, and I heard surprised murmurs ripple through the audience as people realized the connection they'd missed. Some of you may have noticed her determined bidding on the Korean War compass. What you might not know is why military memorabilia holds such special meaning for her. Mrs. Whitmore's expression had shifted to something approaching embarrassment, and I could see her beginning to understand the assumptions she'd made throughout the evening. "Maria has spent years serving our country in ways that most of us can barely imagine," Sofia said, her voice carrying pride and emotion. "She's someone who understands the sacrifice and dedication represented by items like Colonel Morrison's compass, because she's lived that same commitment to service." The room had gone completely quiet now, the kind of attentive silence that comes when people realize they've been witnessing something more significant than they understood. "When she bid $2,000 on that compass tonight," Sofia continued, "she wasn't just buying a piece of military history. She was honoring the memory of a fellow service member and ensuring that Colonel Morrison's story continues to be told." Mr. Davidson stepped forward slightly, and in a voice that carried new respect, he said, "Miss Martinez, would you mind if I asked about your military background? I think our guests would appreciate understanding the perspective you bring to tonight's cause." This was the moment Agent Rodriguez had warned me about. I needed to acknowledge my service without revealing classified details while maintaining the cover story that would allow me to leave with her shortly. I stepped forward slightly, drawing on years of military bearing to project calm confidence despite the complexity of the situation I was navigating. "I served for 15 years, I said, my voice parrying clearly through the quiet room. Multiple deployments, various assignments that taught me the value of precision, reliability, and honoring the service of those who came before us." It was carefully worded to be truthful without being specific, and I saw Agent Rodriguez nod slightly in approval from her position near the wall. Colonel Morrison's compass represents the kind of equipment that service members depend on when everything else fails. Navigation tools like that one guided people through dangerous territory and brought them home safely. That kind of reliability and craftsmanship deserves to be preserved and remembered. The applause that followed was different from the polite acknowledgement I'd heard earlier in the evening. This was genuine respect, and I could see in the faces around me that people were reassessing their earlier assumptions about who I was and why I belonged in this room. Mrs. Whitmore approached me as the crowd began to disperse, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and newfound respect. "Miss Martinez," she said, her voice much warmer than it had been earlier, "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your background and your ability to participate meaningfully in tonight's auction. That was unprofessional and unfair." "No apology necessary," I replied, though I appreciated the acknowledgement. "Sometimes initial impressions need adjustment as we learn more about each other." "Your military service explains your determination in the bidding," she said with what looked like genuine admiration. "That compass will be in excellent hands." Mr. Davidson joined our conversation, carrying a folder with my auction paperwork. "Miss Martinez, we can arrange for payment processing and item pickup at your convenience. There's no rush to complete the transaction tonight if you prefer to handle it during business hours." Agent Rodriguez appeared at my elbow with perfect timing. "Actually," she said smoothly, "Miss Martinez and I need to discuss some administrative matters related to her military service. Would it be possible to expedite the payment processing? We have some time constraints to work around." The explanation was vague enough to avoid raising questions while providing a reasonable cover story for both my need to leave and the presence of a government agent at the auction. "Of course," Mr. Davidson said. "We can process everything right now if that works better for your schedule." As I completed the paperwork and payment for the compass, I found myself surrounded by people offering congratulations and expressing interest in my military background. The woman who'd been bidding against me on the compass approached to shake my hand and commend me on my persistence. Several others shared stories about veterans in their own families and expressed appreciation for my service. The irony wasn't lost on me.
These same people who'd initially dismissed me as someone who didn't belong were now treating me with respect and interest, all because they'd learned about my military service. It was a reminder of how quickly social dynamics could shift when people's preconceptions were challenged by new information. But underlying the positive interactions was the continued awareness that Agent Rodriguez was waiting to brief me on a serious security situation involving my classified background. The compass I just purchased would have to wait while I dealt with whatever crisis had brought a State Department agent to track me down at my sister's charity auction.
As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Sophia found a moment to pull me aside for a private goodbye. Her earlier confidence had given way to visible concern about the official business that was taking me away from her celebration. "Is everything okay?" she asked quietly. "That agent seemed pretty serious about whatever she needed to discuss with you." "It's probably routine," I assured her, though we both knew that State Department agents didn't show up for routine matters. Some administrative issue related to my security clearance or military records. Nothing dangerous, just bureaucratic. Sophia nodded, but I could see she wasn't entirely convinced. "The auction was a huge success," she said, changing the subject to something more positive. "We raised over $40,000 for the foundation. Your compass purchase alone was a significant contribution." "I'm proud of what you accomplished tonight," I said, meaning it completely. This was exactly the kind of event that honors military service while actually helping veterans in practical ways. "Thank you for being here," she said, hugging me tightly. "And thank you for handling Mrs. Whitmore's attitude with such grace. I saw how she treated you earlier, and I was furious." "She apologized," I said. "Sometimes people need a chance to learn and adjust their perspectives. Tonight gave her that opportunity." Agent Rodriguez approached us discreetly, carrying the leather case containing my newly purchased compass. "Miss Martinez, are you ready to go? We have a car waiting outside." I took the case, feeling the weight of the historical artifact I'd fought so hard to acquire. Inside was a piece of military history that had guided a decorated officer through dangerous terrain, and now it was mine to preserve and honor. Whatever classified situation I was about to deal with, at least I'd accomplished what I'd come here to do. "Take care of yourself," Sophia said, giving me one final hug. "And let me know when you can tell me more about whatever this is about." "I will," I promised, though I had no idea when or if I'd be able to share the full story of what was happening. As Agent Rodriguez and I made our way toward the exit, I caught sight of Mrs. Whitmore near the registration table, carefully packing up the evening's paperwork. She looked up as we passed and nodded respectfully, a gesture that carried acknowledgement of the lesson she'd learned about making assumptions based on appearances. The cool evening air was a relief after the warm intensity of the auction hall. Agent Rodriguez led me toward a black sedan parked in the country club's circular driveway, its engine running and another agent visible behind the wheel. "Ms. Martinez," she said as we approached the vehicle, "I want to prepare you for what we'll be discussing during the debrief. The situation involving your identity is more serious than I initially indicated. We believe someone with access to highly classified information has been using your service record for unauthorized intelligence activities." I paused with my hand on the car door handle, the full implication of her words settling over me like cold water. Someone wasn't just impersonating me, they were using my classified military background for potentially treasonous activities. What had started as an evening supporting my sister's charity auction had just become something much more serious and potentially dangerous. "How serious?" I asked. "Serious enough that we need to verify your alibi for the past week and ensure your security clearance hasn't been compromised," Agent Rodriguez replied. "Get in the car and I'll explain everything during the drive to the debrief location." As I settled into the back seat of the government sedan, the compass case in my lap, and the lights of the country club fading behind us, I realized that tonight had become much more than just a successful bid on a piece of military memorabilia. It had become the beginning of something that would test everything I'd learned about service, sacrifice, and the price of carrying classified secrets.
The woman who'd walked into Sofia's charity auction in a borrowed blazer had won more than just a Korean war compass. She'd also inherited a security crisis that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the boundaries between her military service and her civilian life. But that part of the story would have to wait for another time, in a place where conversations about classified matters could be held without risking the safety of innocent people attending charity auctions. For now, the compass rested heavy in my hands, a tangible reminder that some things are worth fighting for, even when the cost is higher than you expected to pay. The government facility was nothing like I expected. Instead of the sterile conference rooms and fluorescent lighting typical of federal buildings, Agent Rodriguez led me into what appeared to be a converted office suite in a downtown high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city lights, and the furniture looked more like a corporate boardroom than a classified briefing space. "Secure location," Rodriguez explained, as she gestured for me to take a seat at a polished conference table. "We prefer conducting sensitive debriefings away from official buildings, fewer questions from curious observers." Two other agents were already present, both studying tablets and speaking in the kind of quiet, urgent tones that suggested serious business. The older man introduced himself as Agent Thompson from the Defense Intelligence Agency, while the younger woman identified herself as Agent Park from the NSA. The presence of multiple agencies told me this wasn't a routine security check. "Ms. Martinez," Thompson began, settling into a chair across from me, "we need to start with your current security clearance status. When did you last undergo a periodic review?" 18 months ago, I replied. "Standard 5-year update. No issues were identified." Agent Park consulted her tablet. "Your clearance shows active status for top secret with SCI access, but your current duty assignment is listed as inactive reserves. Is that accurate?" "Correct. I transitioned to inactive status 3 years ago after completing my active duty commitment." "But you maintained your clearance?" Thompson observed. "That's unusual for someone in inactive status unless there was an expectation of recall or consulting work." I chose my words carefully. The truth was that certain aspects of my military service made complete separation from classified programs complicated, but explaining that would require revealing details I wasn't authorized to share. Some of my previous assignments involved ongoing security considerations. My command recommended maintaining clearance in case of future need. Agent Rodriguez opened a thick folder and spread several photographs across the table. "Ms. Martinez, have you ever seen any of these individuals?" I studied the images carefully. Most showed middle-aged men in various settings: airports, restaurants, office buildings. One photograph caught my attention immediately. A woman with dark hair and sharp features, photographed apparently without her knowledge while talking on a phone. "This one," I said, pointing to the woman. "She looks familiar, but I can't place where I might have seen her." "Her name is Elena Vasquez," Park said, "former intelligence officer with the Colombian military, now working as a freelance contractor for various international clients. We believe she's been using your identity in communications with foreign contacts." The implications hit me like a punch to the stomach. Using my identity how? Thompson pulled out another set of documents. "Email communications referencing classified operations you participated in. Phone calls claiming to represent you in discussions about sensitive intelligence matters. And at least 2 in-person meetings where someone presented credentials identifying herself as Major Maria Martinez." "I haven't been Major Martinez for 3 years," I said, my voice harder than I'd intended. "And I've never authorized anyone to use my identity or reference my service record." "We know," Rodriguez said gently. "That's why we're treating this as identity theft combined with espionage. Someone has been impersonating you to gain access to classified information and establish credibility with foreign intelligence services." Agent Park turned her tablet toward me, showing what appeared to be an email thread. "These communications reference Operation Desert Falcon. Can you confirm your involvement in that mission?" Desert Falcon. I hadn't heard that code name spoken aloud in years, and seeing it on an unauthorized document made my blood run cold. That operation had been compartmentalized at the highest levels, with access restricted to less than a dozen people. The fact that someone was using those details in fake communications suggested a security breach far more serious than simple identity theft. "I can confirm I was involved in Desert Falcon," I said carefully, "but I can't discuss operational details without proper authorization." "We have authorization," Thompson said, sliding a document across the table. "Presidential directive authorizing full disclosure of your service record as it relates to this security investigation." I read the authorization carefully, noting the official seals and signatures that made it legitimate. This wasn't just about someone stealing my identity. This was about potential threats to national security that required exposing classified operations I'd spent years keeping secret. "Desert Falcon was a joint extraction operation," I began, my voice steady despite the discomfort of discussing classified matters. "High-value target in hostile territory, compromised intelligence, multiple agency coordination required." "Your role, specifically?" Park asked. "Air transport and extraction. I piloted the insertion and recovery flights for the ground team." Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. "Miss Martinez, how many people would have had access to those operational details?" I considered the question carefully. "Core planning team, maybe 8 people. Operational participants, another 6. Support personnel with need-to-know access, possibly 12 more. Total universe of people who could provide those details would be under 30. And all of those individuals would have been thoroughly vetted," Thompson noted. "Multiple times. Background investigations, polygraphs, compartmented access approvals." Desert Falcon was classified at levels that required presidential approval to access. The room fell quiet as the agents processed the implications. If someone was using Desert Falcon details to impersonate me, they had either gained unauthorized access to highly classified files, or were working with someone from the original operation who had turned traitor. Agent Park's tablet chimed with an incoming message. She read it quickly, her expression growing more serious. "We just received confirmation that Elena Vasquez met with representatives from 3 different foreign intelligence services in the past month, using your identity and referencing your service record each time." "What kind of information was she sharing?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Operational methods, personnel identification, location details from missions that are still classified," Thompson replied. "Information that could compromise ongoing operations and endanger current personnel." The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. People I'd served with, operations I'd participated in, missions that were still sensitive, all potentially compromised because someone had stolen my identity and was using my reputation to spread classified intelligence. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Rodriguez consulted her notes. "Complete debrief of your activities for the past month, verification of your whereabouts during specific time periods when these meetings occurred, and detailed review of anyone who might have had access to your personal information or service records." We spent the next 2 hours going through my schedule day by day, documenting everything from grocery store visits to coffee shop stops. The agents were particularly interested in any interactions with strangers, any requests for personal information, and any situations where someone might have observed or recorded details about my daily routine. "You mentioned earlier that people at the auction made assumptions about your background," Park said. "Has that happened in other social situations recently?" I thought about the evening's events, particularly Mrs. Whitmore's dismissive attitude, and the surprise when my military service was revealed. It happens fairly regularly. People see someone who doesn't fit their expectations and assume I don't belong in certain settings. "That could actually work in our favor," Thompson mused. "If you're frequently underestimated in civilian settings, it would be harder for someone conducting surveillance to predict your movements or behavior." The comment made me realize how the evening's auction experience had prepared me for this conversation in unexpected ways. Being dismissed and underestimated by people who didn't know my background was frustrating, but it had also taught me to maintain composure under scrutiny and respond professionally to questioning. Agent Rodriguez opened another file. Miss Martinez, we need to discuss your transition from active duty to civilian life. Were there any unusual circumstances around your separation from service? This was the question I'd been expecting and dreading. My transition from active military service hadn't been routine, and explaining the circumstances would require revealing aspects of my background that I'd worked hard to keep private. My final assignment involved a mission that went badly, I said carefully. Multiple casualties, compromised intelligence, political complications at the highest levels. The decision was made that certain personnel should transition to civilian status to avoid ongoing scrutiny. You were burned, Thompson said, using the intelligence community term for operatives whose covers had been compromised.
Not exactly burned, but my continued active service would have raised questions that nobody wanted to answer publicly. Agent Park made notes on her tablet. Were you given any special instructions about maintaining operational security after separation? Standard protocols. Don't discuss classified missions. Don't use my service record for personal gain. Maintain security clearance for potential future needs. Report any unusual contact or surveillance. And have you had any unusual contacts? Rodriguez asked. Anyone asking about your military service, requesting information about past assignments, showing interest in your background beyond normal social curiosity? I thought about the various interactions I'd had over the past few months. Most people who learned about my military service asked general questions about deployment locations or combat experience, the kind of casual curiosity that veterans encountered regularly. But there had been a few conversations that felt different. About 6 weeks ago, I said slowly, I was at a coffee shop near my apartment. A woman struck up a conversation about military service, said she was researching a book about female veterans. She asked very specific questions about flight operations and deployment logistics. All three agents looked up from their notes simultaneously. Describe her, Thompson said urgently. Mid-40s, dark hair, professional appearance. Said her name was Linda Davidson. Claimed to be a freelance journalist. She had business cards and seemed knowledgeable about military terminology. Agent Rodriguez pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a photo gallery. Was this the woman? The photograph showed the same person I'd identified earlier as Elena Vasquez, but in different clothing and with slightly different hair. The facial features were unmistakably the same. That's her, I confirmed. But she identified herself as Linda Davidson, not Elena Vasquez. Elena Vasquez is her real name, Park explained. Linda Davidson is one of several false identities she's been using. What exactly did you tell her? I replayed the coffee shop conversation in my mind, trying to remember exactly what information I'd shared. General stuff about deployment experiences, some details about the challenges of military aviation, basic information about transition to civilian life. Nothing classified, but probably enough for someone to sound credible when discussing my background. Did she ask about specific operations or time periods? She was interested in the time frame when I would have been involved in Desert Falcon, though she didn't use that name. Asked about deployments in that general geographic region during those years. The agents exchanged glances that suggested this information was significant. Ms. Martinez, Rodriguez said, we believe that coffee shop conversation was intelligence gathering. Elena Vasquez used the information you shared to build a more credible impersonation of your identity. The realization that I'd unknowingly helped someone steal my identity and compromise classified operations made me feel sick. I'd been trained to recognize intelligence gathering attempts. But in a casual civilian setting, I'd let my guard down and provided exactly the kind of biographical details that a skilled impersonator needed. She was very good, I said. Professional, knowledgeable, seemed genuinely interested in veteran experiences rather than fishing for intelligence. That's what makes her dangerous, Park noted. Elena Vasquez spent 15 years in military intelligence before going freelance. She knows how to conduct social engineering operations that don't trigger security awareness. Agent Thompson's phone buzzed with what appeared to be an urgent message. He read it quickly, his expression growing grave. We have a problem, he announced.
Intelligence services in 3 different countries are reporting that someone claiming to be Maria Martinez has approached them offering information about current U.S. Special Operations capabilities. The meetings are scheduled for this week. My stomach dropped. Not only had someone stolen my identity to compromise past operations, but they were now using my name to potentially betray ongoing missions and endanger active personnel. What can we do to stop it? I asked. That's why we need you, Rodriguez explained. We're going to set up a counterintelligence operation using your real identity to expose Elena Vasquez and determine who's been providing her with classified information. The idea of becoming bait in an espionage operation wasn't appealing, but I understood the necessity. If someone was using my identity to commit treason, I had a responsibility to help stop them before more damage was done. What would that involve? I asked. We establish you in a location where Elena Vasquez believes you'll be conducting business related to your military service, Thompson explained. When she approaches to continue her impersonation, we'll be ready to apprehend her and anyone she's working with. Agent Park pulled up what appeared to be a floor plan on her tablet. We've identified a pattern in her operations. She prefers high-end social settings where military veterans might naturally network. Charity events, professional conferences, upscale venues where security isn't obvious but credibility matters. The similarity to tonight's auction wasn't lost on me. Like my sister's fundraiser. Exactly. Events where someone with your background would have legitimate reasons to attend and interact with other professionals. Rodriguez opened another file folder. We want to establish you at the International Defense Contractors Conference next week. It's being held at the Marriott downtown with attendees from military, government, and private sector organizations. Elena Vasquez has registered for the conference using another false identity, Thompson added. We believe she's planning to use that setting to make contact with potential intelligence buyers while posing as you. The plan was starting to make sense, but I had concerns about the operational security. If she's been studying my background and possibly conducting surveillance, won't she recognize that I'm not acting normally? That's why we need you to act completely naturally, Park explained. Attend conference sessions that would genuinely interest you. Network with people in ways that reflect your real personality and background. The more authentic your behavior, the more likely she is to approach you. Agent Rodriguez leaned back in her chair.
Miss Martinez, I need to be completely honest about the risks involved. Elena Vasquez has connections to some very dangerous people. If this operation goes wrong, you could be putting yourself in serious physical danger. I thought about the compass sitting in its leather case on the table beside me, a reminder of the kind of service that required accepting danger for the sake of protecting others. Colonel Morrison had carried that compass through hostile territory, trusting his life to its accuracy while completing missions that served a larger purpose. What safeguards would be in place? I asked. Full surveillance team, emergency extraction protocols, encrypted communication devices, Thompson listed. You'd never be alone or unmonitored, but the security presence would be invisible to avoid alerting Elena Vasquez or her associates. And if she approaches me? You engage naturally, but use predetermined phrases to signal our surveillance team, Rodriguez explained. We'll have recording equipment to capture any admissions she makes about her activities or the people she's working with. The conference plan seemed sound, but I was still troubled by the larger implications of Elena Vasquez's activities. Someone with access to highly classified information was feeding her details about operations like Desert Falcon, which meant there was likely a traitor within the intelligence community itself. Have you identified who might be providing her with classified information? I asked. The 3 agents exchanged glances before Thompson answered. We have suspicions, but no definitive proof. That's another reason we need this operation to succeed. Elena Vasquez might lead us to her intelligence sources. Agent Park closed her tablet and looked at me directly. Miss Martinez, we understand this is a lot to process. You came to your sister's charity auction tonight expecting to bid on some military memorabilia, and now we're asking you to participate in a counterintelligence operation against someone who's been impersonating you. The understatement almost made me laugh, despite the serious circumstances. It's definitely not how I plan to spend my evening. We can give you 24 hours to consider the proposition, Rodriguez offered. But I need to emphasize that time is critical. Elena Vasquez is scheduled to make contact with foreign intelligence services within the next week, and every day we delay gives her more opportunity to compromise sensitive information. I looked around the conference room, taking in the city lights visible through the windows and the serious expressions of the three agents who had outlined a plan that would temporarily transform my quiet civilian life into something resembling my old military assignments. "I don't need 24 hours, I said. When Elena Vasquez impersonated me, she put people I served with at risk. She compromised operations that other veterans died protecting. If there's a way to stop her and identify her sources, I'm obligated to help." Thompson nodded with what looked like approval. "We hoped you'd see it that way." "What's my cover story for the conference?" I asked, already shifting into operational mode. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a registration packet with my name printed on the conference materials. "You're attending as an independent consultant specializing in military logistics and transportation. It's close enough to your real background to be credible, but vague enough to give you flexibility in conversations." "When does the conference start?" "Monday morning. We'll spend the weekend preparing you with up-to-date intelligence about Elena Vasquez's methods, briefing you on the other attendees who might be targets, and rehearsing communication protocols." As the meeting concluded and arrangements were made for the weekend briefings, I found myself holding the leather case containing Colonel Morrison's compass. The weight of the historical artifact served as a reminder that military service sometimes required accepting missions that were more complex and dangerous than they initially appeared. Tonight had started with me walking into a charity auction in borrowed clothes, being dismissed by people who assumed I didn't belong there. Now I was preparing to attend an international defense conference as bait in a counterintelligence operation designed to capture someone who had stolen my identity for espionage purposes. The compass had guided a decorated officer through hostile territory during wartime. Soon, it would sit on my hotel room dresser while I attempted to navigate equally treacherous terrain in the world of international intelligence and betrayal. As Agent Rodriguez drove me home through the quiet city streets, I reflected on the strange symmetry of the evening's events. At the auction, I'd been underestimated and dismissed until people learned about my military background. At the conference, I would need to use that same background as both camouflage and weapon, drawing Elena Vasquez close enough to expose her while avoiding the kind of attention that might alert her to the trap being set. "Miss Martinez," Rodriguez said as we pulled up to my apartment building, "are you sure you're prepared for what we're asking? This isn't like military operations where you have clear command structure and defined objectives. Intelligence work is messier, with more variables and higher personal risk." I gathered my purse and the compass case, considering her question. "Agent Rodriguez, tonight I walked into a room full of people who thought they knew who I was based on appearances. I outbid serious collectors for an artifact that means more to me than they could understand, and I did it while maintaining composure despite being treated like I didn't belong there." I paused with my hand on the car door handle. If I can handle a charity auction full of condescending socialites, I think I can manage a defense conference full of intelligence operatives. Rodriguez smiled for the first time all evening. "Point taken. We'll see you Saturday morning for the operational briefing." As I walked toward my apartment, compass case in hand, I realized that the quiet civilian life I'd built after military service was about to be temporarily set aside for something that felt surprisingly familiar. Once again, I would be using my training and experience to complete a mission that others couldn't or wouldn't handle. The difference was that this time, instead of flying transport missions in hostile territory, I'd be navigating the equally dangerous world of espionage and betrayal in a downtown hotel conference room. The stakes were just as high, but the weapons would be words instead of aircraft, and the enemy would be hiding behind false identities rather than military uniforms. Colonel Morrison's compass had seen him through the challenges of wartime navigation. Soon, it would sit on my hotel room dresser while I attempted to navigate equally treacherous terrain in the world of international intelligence and betrayal. As Agent Rodriguez drove me home through the quiet city streets, I reflected on the strange symmetry of the evening's events. At the auction, I'd been underestimated and dismissed until people learned about my military background.
At the conference, I would need to use that same background as both camouflage and weapon, drawing Elena Vasquez close enough to expose her while avoiding the kind of attention that might alert her to the trap being set. "Miss Martinez," Rodriguez said as we pulled up to my apartment building, "are you sure you're prepared for what we're asking? This isn't like military operations where you have clear command structure and defined objectives. Intelligence work is messier, with more variables and higher personal risk." I gathered my purse and the compass case, considering her question. "Agent Rodriguez, tonight I walked into a room full of people who thought they knew who I was based on appearances. I outbid serious collectors for an artifact that means more to me than they could understand, and I did it while maintaining composure despite being treated like I didn't belong there." I paused with my hand on the car door handle. If I can handle a charity auction full of condescending socialites, I think I can manage a defense conference full of intelligence operatives. Rodriguez smiled for the first time all evening. "Point taken. We'll see you Saturday morning for the operational briefing." As I walked toward my apartment, compass case in hand, I realized that the quiet civilian life I'd built after military service was about to be temporarily set aside for something that felt surprisingly familiar. Once again, I would be using my training and experience to complete a mission that others couldn't or wouldn't handle. The difference was that this time, instead of flying transport missions in hostile territory, I'd be navigating the equally dangerous world of espionage and betrayal in a downtown hotel conference room. The stakes were just as high, but the weapons would be words instead of aircraft, and the enemy would be hiding behind false identities rather than military uniforms. Colonel Morrison's compass had seen him through the challenges of wartime navigation. Soon, it would serve as a talisman for an entirely different kind of mission, one where the terrain was social rather than geographic, but where precision and reliability remained just as critical for survival. The weekend would bring intensive preparation for a role I'd never planned to play. Monday would bring the performance of a lifetime, with national security hanging in the balance, and my own safety dependent on my ability to convincingly portray someone Elena Vasquez thought she knew well enough to impersonate. But tonight, I would simply be Maria Martinez, veteran and compass collector, trying to process how a simple evening supporting my sister's charity auction had evolved into the beginning of what might be the most important mission of my post-military career. The International Defense Contractors Conference buzzed with the controlled energy of professionals who dealt in matters of national security. The Marriott's Grand Ballroom had been transformed into a networking space where military personnel, government officials, and private contractors mingled over coffee and Danish pastries, their conversations peppered with acronyms and references to classified programs I recognized but couldn't discuss openly. I stood near the registration table, adjusting the small communication device hidden beneath my conference badge while scanning the crowd for any sign of Elena Vasquez. 3 days of intensive briefings had prepared me for this moment, but the reality of serving as bait in a counterintelligence operation felt surreal after years of quiet civilian life. The conference materials identified me as Maria Martinez, independent logistics consultant, a cover identity close enough to my real background to withstand casual.
I turned to find a distinguished man in his 50s extending his hand. Colonel James Brennan, recently retired from Joint Chiefs Staff. "Are you presenting this week?" "Just attending," I replied, shaking his hand with the firm grip I'd learned in military training. "Maria Martinez. I specialize in transportation logistics for sensitive operations." Brennan's eyebrows rose with interest. "Fascinating field. I imagine you have some stories about moving people and equipment in challenging circumstances." The comment was innocent enough, but I'd been briefed to watch for anyone showing unusual interest in my operational background. "Every logistics professional has war stories," I said carefully, "though the interesting ones usually can't be shared at conferences like this." He laughed appreciatively. "Understood completely. Discretion is essential in our line of work." As Brennan moved on to other conversations, I noticed a woman with dark hair standing near the coffee service, her attention seemingly focused on her phone, but her positioning allowing her to observe my interaction. She matched Elena Vasquez's general description, but at this distance, I couldn't be certain of her identity. The morning session focused on emerging technologies in military transportation, a topic that would naturally attract someone impersonating my background. I took detailed notes while maintaining awareness of the other attendees, particularly those who seemed more interested in observing conversations than participating in them. During the break, the dark-haired woman approached my table with practiced confidence. She was older than the photographs had suggested, with sharp features and the kind of composed presence that came from years of intelligence work. "Ms. Martinez," she said, her accent carrying just a trace of something that might have been South American. "I'm Carmen Rodriguez from Strategic Solutions International. I believe we have mutual acquaintances in the transportation field." The name was different from the Elena Vasquez identity I'd been briefed about, but Agent Rodriguez had warned me that she used multiple aliases. More importantly, her claim about mutual acquaintances was exactly the kind of opening an impersonator would use to establish credibility. "Possibly," I replied neutrally. "The logistics community is smaller than people realize." She settled into the chair beside me with the familiarity of someone who belonged in professional military circles. "I've heard impressive things about your work on sensitive extraction operations, desert region deployments, if I'm not mistaken." The reference to desert operations made my pulse quicken slightly, but I maintained my composure. Elena Vasquez was fishing for confirmation of my involvement in Desert Falcon without naming the operation directly. "I've worked in various geographic regions," I said. "Climate considerations are always important in logistics planning." Carmen smiled with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "Very diplomatically phrased. I respect professionals who understand operational security." She was good, I had to admit. Her approach was subtle enough to avoid triggering obvious security concerns while probing for exactly the kind of information she needed to continue her impersonation. If I hadn't been briefed about her activities, I might have assumed she was simply another veteran making professional small talk. "Are you presenting at the conference?" I asked, turning the conversation back toward her. "Panel discussion tomorrow about international logistics coordination," she replied smoothly. "Though I suspect the most interesting conversations happen in settings like this rather than formal presentations." Her phone buzzed with what appeared to be a text message. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Something about the message seemed to concern her. "Ms. Martinez," she said, her tone becoming more urgent, "I wonder if we could continue our conversation in a more private setting. There are some mutual contacts who specifically asked me to reach out to you about potential consulting opportunities." This was the moment Agent Rodriguez had prepared me for. Elena Vasquez was moving to the next phase of her operation, attempting to isolate me for more detailed intelligence gathering or to arrange a meeting with foreign contacts. "What kind of opportunities?" I asked, using the phrase that would alert the surveillance team to begin recording our conversation. Carmen leaned closer, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Clients who are very interested in transportation capabilities for sensitive operations. People who appreciate professionals with your specific experience and are willing to compensate generously for consulting services." The euphemisms were thin disguises for what she was actually offering: payment for classified information about military transportation operations. She was essentially inviting me to commit treason while making it sound like legitimate consulting work. "That sounds intriguing," I said, using another predetermined phrase to signal that she was making the kind of offers our operation was designed to record. "What specific capabilities are they most interested in?" "High-value extraction scenarios," she replied. "Situations where standard protocols might not apply and creative solutions are required. Your Desert Falcon experience would be particularly relevant." There it was. Elena Vasquez had just directly referenced a classified operation while soliciting me for intelligence services. The surveillance team would have clear recordings of her attempting to recruit me for espionage activities. But before I could respond with the next scripted phrase, Carmen's expression changed suddenly. Her eyes focused on something behind me, and her face went pale with what looked like recognition and fear.
"Ms. Martinez," she said quickly, "I think there may be some confusion about this meeting. Perhaps we should postpone our conversation until another time." She started to rise from her chair, but Agent Rodriguez appeared at our table with perfect timing. "Excuse me," Rodriguez said, showing her badge discreetly. "I need to speak with both of you about a security matter." Carmen's attempt to leave was blocked by Thompson, who had positioned himself near the exit. The other conference attendees were too absorbed in their own networking to notice the drama unfolding at our table. "Elena Vasquez," Rodriguez said quietly, "you're under arrest for espionage, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit treason." Carmen's shoulders sagged in defeat. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to document your activities and identify your intelligence sources," Thompson replied, producing handcuffs that he kept concealed beneath a conference program.
But Elena Vasquez wasn't finished yet. "You want to know who gave me the Desert Falcon information?" she said, her voice carrying a note of desperation mixed with spite. "It wasn't some mysterious traitor in your intelligence community." She looked directly at me with an expression that mixed admiration and regret. "It was you, Major Martinez. 6 weeks ago at that coffee shop, you told me everything I needed to know about your deployment history, operational timeframes, and the general nature of your classified assignments." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I thought back to that casual conversation, remembering how impressed I'd been with her knowledge of military terminology and her apparent genuine interest in veteran experiences. "I never mentioned Desert Falcon specifically," I protested. "You didn't need to," Elena replied. "You gave me enough biographical details to identify which operations you'd been involved in, and then I used Freedom of Information Act requests and leaked documents to fill in the operational specifics. Your own words provided the framework I needed to impersonate you credibly." Agent Rodriguez stepped closer to Elena. "That explains how you got background information, but not how you accessed current intelligence about ongoing operations." Elena's laugh was bitter. "There is no current intelligence. I've been selling these foreign contacts information that's already been declassified or leaked, just presented in a way that makes it seem fresh and valuable. They think they're buying current U.S. operational capabilities, but they're actually paying premium prices for intelligence that's years out of date." The revelation was simultaneously relieving and disturbing. Elena Vasquez hadn't actually compromised current operations or endangered active personnel, but she had committed serious crimes by impersonating me and defrauding foreign intelligence services. "The meetings with foreign contacts were real," Thompson confirmed. "Oh, absolutely real," Elena said as Rodriguez secured the handcuffs. "I've made quite a bit of money selling them information they could have found themselves with enough research. The irony is that by impersonating Major Martinez, I gave them confidence in intelligence that wasn't actually worth the prices they were paying." As hotel security discreetly escorted Elena Vasquez away, I found myself processing the complex emotions of the successful operation. Relief that no current operations had been compromised, mixed with embarrassment that my own casual conversation had provided the foundation for her impersonation scheme. Agent Rodriguez returned to the table where I was still sitting, trying to process everything that had just happened. "How do you feel?" she asked, settling into Elena's vacated chair. "Like I just learned a very expensive lesson about operational security," I replied. "Even in civilian life, casual conversations about military service can have serious consequences." "Elena Vasquez was a professional intelligence operative," Rodriguez reminded me. "She was specifically trained to extract information from social interactions without triggering security awareness. You weren't the first person she manipulated, and you wouldn't have been the last." Thompson joined us, carrying a coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd just completed a successful mission. "The foreign contacts she was meeting with are going to be very unhappy when they realize they've been paying premium prices for declassified information." "What happens to her now?" I asked. "Federal charges for espionage, identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy," Rodriguez listed. "She's looking at 20 years minimum, possibly more, depending on how many other identities she was using."
As the conference resumed its normal rhythm around us, I reflected on the strange journey that had begun with my sister's charity auction. In less than a week, I'd gone from being dismissed at a fundraising event to serving as bait in a counterintelligence operation that exposed an international espionage scheme. "Miss Martinez," Thompson said, "we want you to know that your cooperation was essential to this operation's success. Elena Vasquez had been evading law enforcement for months, and without your willingness to serve as bait, we might never have been able to apprehend her. I'm just glad no active operations were actually compromised," I said. The thought that my casual conversation might have endangered current personnel was hard to accept. Agent Rodriguez gathered her materials and prepared to leave. "You should also know that this operation will remain classified. Officially, Elena Vasquez was arrested for financial fraud rather than espionage. Your involvement and the details of her impersonation scheme won't appear in any public records." I nodded, understanding the necessity of maintaining cover stories even after successful operations. "What about the foreign contacts she was selling information to?" "They'll be dealt with through diplomatic channels," Thompson said vaguely. "Let's just say they're going to be very embarrassed when they realize how badly they've been fooled." As the agents prepared to leave, I found myself thinking about Colonel Morrison's compass, sitting safely in my apartment while I'd been navigating the treacherous terrain of international espionage. The compass had guided a decorated officer through hostile territory during wartime, relying on precision and reliability to complete dangerous missions. This week had taught me that civilian life could present its own forms of hostile territory, where the dangers are subtler but equally real. Casual conversations could become intelligence-gathering operations, charity auctions could be surveillance opportunities, and professional conferences could serve as covers for espionage activities. But just as Colonel Morrison had trusted his compass to guide him home safely, I'd learned to trust my training and instincts to navigate challenges that seemed far removed from traditional military operations. Whether dealing with condescending socialites at fundraising events or serving as bait for foreign intelligence operatives at professional conferences, the same principles applied. Maintain composure under pressure, stay alert to developing situations, and never let others' assumptions define your capabilities. The compass had cost me $2,000 at Sofia's auction, but the lesson it represented had proven invaluable during this week's unexpected mission. Some tools remain reliable, regardless of the terrain, whether that terrain is geographic, social, or operational. As I gathered my conference materials and prepared to return to my quiet civilian life, I realized that the woman who'd walked into that charity auction in borrowed clothes had discovered something important about herself. Military service had prepared me for challenges I'd never anticipated, in settings I'd never imagined, against adversaries who hid behind false identities and social manipulation rather than uniforms. Elena Vasquez had chosen to impersonate me because she thought my background provided credibility for her espionage activities. What she hadn't understood was that the same background that made me worth impersonating also made me capable of helping to expose her crimes. Sometimes the best way to catch someone who's pretending to be you is to be authentically yourself, letting your real capabilities speak louder than any assumed identity ever could. The compass would guide me home, just as it had guided Colonel Morrison decades earlier, carrying the knowledge that precision and reliability remain valuable regardless of how the mission parameters might change. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.